The Interstellar Combat Institute occupied the entire northern hemisphere of Apex 7, a moon that had been terraformed specifically to host the galaxy's most prestigious military academy. Someone with more money than sense had decided that warriors needed dramatic backdrops for their education, so the campus sprawled across mountains that touched artificial clouds, overlooking canyons that had been carved by machines, pretending to be geology. The architecture screamed military precision mixed with unnecessary grandeur, all sharp angles and reinforced alloys that could theoretically withstand orbital bombardment. Theoretically being the operative word, since nobody had actually tested it, and the insurance premiums would have bankrupted 3-star systems. The Institute drew its cadets from the Galactic Defense Concordat, which was the military arm of civilized space, and the organization responsible for keeping approximately 40% of known space from devolving into complete anarchy. The other 60% was apparently managing their chaos just fine without oversight, thank you very much, and resented any implication otherwise. Here was the fascinating thing about military organizations that spanned multiple species. They developed hierarchies that everyone understood, but nobody officially acknowledged. It was like a caste system designed by committee and implemented through a combination of tradition, genetics, and spectacular denial. At the apex, you had your warrior species, the Draconer, with their scaled hide that could deflect plasma rounds, and their delightful tendency to solve problems by hitting them harder. The Kythe, insectoid nightmares, standing 2.5 meters tall with mandibles that could shear through hull plating. The Valorian, crystalline beings who could manipulate gravitational fields and had approximately zero concept of mercy or compromise. These were species that had achieved spaceflight by first conquering everything that moved on their homeworlds, then looking at the stars and deciding they needed more things to conquer. Then you had your support species. The engineers who kept ships flying, the medics who patched people up, the administrators who made sure everyone got paid and the toilets flushed. Vital roles, certainly, but not the sort that got monuments or had documentaries made about them. At the bottom of this carefully unspoken hierarchy were the scholar species. The Quillen, with their 3-lobed brains and gift for mathematics. The Prill, who could process languages faster than translation software. The Ven, who had literally evolved from prey animals and had survived through being excellent at hiding and really good at making friends with the predators. The Concordat protected them, mostly, because it looked progressive in the recruitment materials. And then, awkwardly positioned somewhere in the middle of this entire mess, were humans. Humans had joined the Concordat 68 standard cycles ago, which made them the newest members of a club that had been running for 3,000 cycles. They were bipedal, which was common. They were mostly hairless, which was less common but not particularly noteworthy. They came from a Class 8 death world, which earned them some respect until people learned that Class 8 was basically the galactic rating for dangerous but not absurdly so. The problem with humans was that they were bafflingly average at everything. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the smartest, not even the most violent, despite their entertaining history of creative warfare. They were just sort of there, filling out the ranks with a peculiar intensity that made instructors uncomfortable without being able to articulate exactly why. The Institute had begun accepting human cadets 12 cycles ago, as part of an integration initiative that tested well with focus groups. Most species figured it was harmless. Humans would wash out or fade into unremarkable careers, managing supply depots. They would learn their place in the grand order of things and stop asking uncomfortable questions about why the hierarchy existed. Most species were about to learn a very expensive lesson about assumptions. The Institute had this tradition called trial by combat, which was exactly what it sounded like with extra paperwork. The logic went like this. Military organizations dealt with warriors. Warriors had concepts of honor. Honor sometimes demanded satisfaction, and it was better to have satisfaction happen in a controlled environment than in a hallway where someone might damage expensive equipment. So if a cadet had a grievance that could not be resolved through proper channels, which was most grievances, since proper channels involved filling out forms in triplicate and waiting for committee approval, they could issue a formal combat challenge. The challenged party could accept or decline, though declining usually meant social death and a career that would never advance beyond supply management. The arena complex was built for this purpose. 3 separate fighting spaces ranging from intimate to stadium-sized, all equipped with energy shields, medical teams, sensor arrays, and enough safety protocols to make the lawyers happy. Cadets fought according to weight classes and species compatibility ratings, theoretically preventing gross mismatches. Theoretically being another one of those words that sounded better in official documents than in practice. Deaths were rare, the administration liked to emphasize. Only about 2% of trial by combat matches resulted in fatalities, which was apparently within acceptable parameters. Cadets died in training accidents all the time anyway. At least arena deaths had proper documentation. Warrior species loved trial by combat. It reinforced the natural order. It provided entertainment. It was tradition. And tradition was apparently a magic word that justified all manner of questionable decisions. Jax Corvin had been at the Institute for 3 cycles, which was exactly long enough to understand the system and still young enough to think she could work within it. She was human, which meant she occupied this strange space where she was technically allowed in combat training, but nobody really expected her to excel. She stood 170 centimeters in station gravity, had dark hair cropped in military regulation style, and possessed the kind of face that people forgot within minutes of meeting her. Being forgettable was useful. People who forgot you also underestimated you. Her bunkmate was a Quillen named Tick, which was the shortened version of a name that required vocal harmonics humans could not produce. Quillen were small, standing barely a meter tall, covered in soft fur that shifted colors based on their emotional state, with enormous eyes that made them look perpetually surprised. They had evolved from tree-dwelling herbivores on a world with relatively few predators, which meant they had survived through being clever rather than dangerous. Tick was brilliant. Top marks in strategic analysis, perfect scores in logistics coordination, could calculate supply chain solutions in their head that made senior officers weep with joy. Tick also had this unfortunate habit of being helpful to everyone, which was endearing right up until it attracted exactly the wrong kind of attention. The wrong kind of attention had names. Vorth, a Drakenor in his 4th cycle, who stood 2.5 meters tall and had scales that gleamed like polished weapons. Krell, a Kythe whose mandibles clicked when he talked, and who came from a hive that had produced 12 admirals. Shanrex, a Valorian whose crystalline structure refracted light in ways that made looking at her physically uncomfortable, and who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that her lineage could be traced back to the Valorian Empire's founding families. There were 2 others in their social circle, both Drakenor, both perfectly happy to follow Vorth's lead in anything that involved demonstrating dominance. The incident started in a tactical simulation. Cadets were running a planetary assault scenario, working in mixed species teams to coordinate ground forces, orbital support, and logistics. It was the kind of exercise designed to teach cooperation and communication, which meant approximately half the participants treated it as personal glory competition. Vorth was commanding one of the assault teams. He made a call to commit his forces to a fortified position without proper reconnaissance, because Drakenor tactical doctrine emphasized aggressive action and overwhelming force. Tick, who was managing logistics for the same scenario, politely pointed out that the supply lines could not support that level of engagement and that satellite reconnaissance showed 3 hidden artillery emplacements that would annihilate any direct assault. Vorth's team followed his orders anyway. The simulation killed 80% of his forces within 4 minutes. The after-action analysis, which was broadcast to the entire class, highlighted Tick's assessment as tactically sound and Vorth's command decision as catastrophically flawed. In front of 40 cadets, including a visiting command officer who was there to evaluate performance, Drakenor did not handle public embarrassment well. It had something to do with their evolutionary history as apex predators who maintained dominance through displays of strength. Losing face was worse than losing a fight. Vorth and his cohort cornered Tick after class, and made it very clear that the Quillen had overstepped. Small species should know better than to humiliate their superiors. Tick, to everyone's surprise, did not apologize. Tick simply stated that the data was accurate, the analysis was correct, and that perhaps Drakenor tactical doctrine needed to account for things like reality. The formal challenge came down 48 hours later. Trial by combat. Vorth as primary challenger, with his 4 companions listed as supporting challengers, which meant they could participate if Tick brought seconds. Since Tick had no seconds and would not know how to fight if they did, the format would be sequential, one opponent at a time until submission or incapacitation. It was legal. It was properly documented. It was murder dressed up in tradition. Shax tried everything. She went to the instructors, who expressed sympathy but explained their hands were tied by regulations. She went to the commandant's office, where a board administrator informed her that trial by combat was protected under concordant law, and interfering would create diplomatic incidents. She even tried to get Tick to apologize, to smooth it over, but Tick had this stubborn streak that came from being small your entire life, and learning that backing down only encouraged predators. The match was scheduled for Arena 2, which seated 5,000 spectators, and was used for fights that drew institutional attention. Shax was required to attend as Tick's bunkmate. She sat in the cadet section, and watched her best friend walk onto the combat floor. The fight lasted 6 minutes. Vorth was not interested in a quick victory. He was interested in making a statement. Every strike was calculated for maximum pain within the rules. Every throw slammed Tick into the floor hard enough to rattle teeth. The referee, a Drakenor himself, allowed everything that was technically legal and ignored everything that technically was not. When Tick finally lost consciousness, their fur had gone white with shock and pain. 3 ribs were broken. Their left arm was shattered. Internal bleeding required immediate surgical intervention. The medical team extracted Tick while Vorth stood in the arena center, arms raised, accepting applause from cadets who thought this was justice. Shax sat in the stands and felt something very old wake up in the back of her mind, something that had gotten humans through ice ages and extinction events, and every predator their planet could throw at them. The thing about humans that other species consistently failed to understand was that they were not actually designed for fair fights. Humans were persistence hunters. Back on Earth, before civilization, they had hunted prey by following it until it died of exhaustion, not by being faster, not by being stronger, by simply refusing to stop. They could regulate body temperature through sweating, which let them run in conditions that would kill other predators. They could operate on minimal sleep. They could push through pain that would incapacitate species with more efficient biology. Humans were also tool users at a genetic level, which meant they approached every problem with the question, how can I solve this with what I have available? They were pattern recognition machines with opposable thumbs and truly disturbing creativity. And humans were pack animals in ways that went deeper than social structures. Harm one human, you had problems with all of them. Not because of laws or regulations, but because millions of years of evolution had written it into their basic programming. Shax visited Tick in the medical center. The Quillen was sedated, wrapped in regenerative membranes, hooked up to machines that beeped in rhythms that were supposed to be reassuring, but just sounded like timers counting down to something. The human medic on duty, one of 3 on station, gave Shax a tired look and confirmed full recovery was expected. In about 6 weeks, with permanent scarring and probable psychological trauma, Shax sat by the bed for 4 hours without moving. Then she stood up, walked out, and headed directly to the Institute's legal archives. She spent 18 hours reading through regulations, not the current ones, the old ones. The founding documents from when the Institute was first established and different species were still figuring out how to coexist without killing each other in the corridors. She found what she needed buried in subsection 47C of the original charter, Champion's Clause. If a cadet was wronged and could not seek justice themselves due to physical limitation, a champion could be appointed to seek restitution on their behalf. The champion would face all involved parties in sequential combat. All parties. Not just the primary challenger. It had not been invoked in 900 cycles. Shax filed the paperwork through the Legal Affairs Terminal at 0300 station time. She listed herself as champion. She listed Vorzak and his 4 companions as respondents. She requested Arena 1, the largest venue, because if she was doing this, everyone was going to watch. The system processed her filing automatically. By the time administrative staff arrived for day shift, it was already logged and legally binding. The deputy commandant tried to reverse it, spent 3 hours with legal counsel trying to find a loophole. There was not one. The Champions Clause was foundational law, written by the original Concordat members, and superseded all subsequent regulations. The news spread through the Institute at the speed of gossip, which was faster than official communications and more accurate than intelligence reports. A human, challenging 5 warrior caste cadets. In Arena 1, the betting pools opened within 2 hours. The odds against Shax were astronomical, because everyone had seen humans in combat training. They were adequate, serviceable. They could hold their own against mid-tier species in fair matches. But warrior caste opponents? 5 of them? After each fight, she would be more tired, more injured, more vulnerable. It was suicide with proper documentation. The instructors tried to talk her out of it. Her combat instructor, a scarred Kythe named Trelvik who had fought in 3 campaigns, cornered her after formation and explained in very small words that she would die. Not might. Would. The arena had rules, but those rules still allowed for permanent injury and fatal accidents. 5 consecutive matches meant exponential damage accumulation. Shax thanked him for his concern and continued preparations. The human cadets, all 22 of them currently enrolled, approached her separately. They did not try to dissuade her. They offered to help train. They shared techniques from Earth's various martial traditions: boxing, judo, Krav Maga, Muay Thai, wrestling. They taught her dirty tricks that were technically legal. They did not say much, but there was understanding in their eyes, recognition of something that transcended words. The warrior caste cadets thought it was entertainment. Vorzak actually laughed when he heard this deep rumbling sound that shook his scales. He would break the little human, the same way he had broken her pet. Maybe slower this time, make it educational. Shax spent 5 days preparing. She studied every match her opponents had ever fought, analyzing patterns, preferences, weaknesses. She trained during off hours in auxiliary gyms, running drills that looked bizarre to anyone watching but made perfect sense to anyone who understood human physiology. She did not train to fight like a warrior, she trained to fight like a human. Arena 1 seated 15,000. On the day of Shax's matches, it was at maximum capacity, with another 5,000 watching on monitors throughout the Institute. Cadets from every species packed the stands. Some came to watch the human get destroyed. Some came out of morbid curiosity. A few came because they wanted to see what happened when you pushed a human past their breaking point. The arena floor was 45 meters in diameter, variable terrain that could be adjusted between matches, energy barriers humming at the perimeter. Medical teams were staged at 6 points with full emergency equipment. The referee was a neutral Ven, a rarity, because even the administration realized that species bias might be problematic in a match with this much attention. Shax entered through the main gate wearing light combat armor over vital areas and flexible material that allowed full range of motion. No weapons, because trial by combat was unarmed only. She looked small under the massive arena lighting, unremarkable, forgettable. Vorzak entered from the opposite side to thunderous applause from warrior caste sections. 2.5 meters of scaled muscle and confidence, 4 previous arena victories, never defeated. He had fought a Kythe in his 2nd cycle and left them in medical for 3 months. The referee called them to center, explained rules in a high-pitched voice that carried across the arena. First to submit, first to lose consciousness, or first to be medically unable to continue. Lethal force was prohibited, but permanent injury was acceptable. They returned to starting positions. The match began. Vorzak came in like a freight transport because Drakenor tactical doctrine emphasized overwhelming force. Closing distance, using reach advantage, planning to grapple and use his strength to end this quickly and brutally. Shax was not there when he arrived. She had circled left before he reached her, forcing him to turn disrupting his momentum. Drakenor were powerful, but their mass meant they could not change direction quickly. Vorth adjusted and charged again. Jax evaded again, this time striking his knee as she passed. Not a powerful blow, barely seemed to register, but it landed precisely on the lateral joint. The crowd was confused. Arena matches were supposed to be exchanges of strength, tests of power and endurance through direct confrontation. You did not run away and peck at your opponent like a scavenger bird. Vorth roared and lunged. Jax ducked under his arms, struck the same knee again, danced away. This pattern repeated 9 more times over 4 minutes. By the 10th strike, Vorth was limping. The crowd was beginning to understand something disturbing. Humans were not strong, but they were efficient in ways that made strength irrelevant. Every strike Jax landed targeted the same locations, same joints, same pressure points, same structural weaknesses. She was not trying to overpower Vorth. She was dismantling him through accumulated damage. Drakenor physiology was optimized for explosive power, which meant their joints had to support enormous stress loads. Repeated impacts in precise locations caused inflammation, compromised stability, created cascading structural failure. Jax was giving Vorth a catastrophic repetitive stress injury in real time while he was still trying to fight. He finally caught her at the 17-minute mark. One massive hand closed around her torso, and the warrior caste sections erupted because this was it. This was where the human learned her place in the hierarchy. Jax went completely limp instead of struggling, used Vorth's own grip strength against him, twisted with his motion instead of against it, dislocated her own shoulder to slip the grasp, rolled away, while Vorth was still processing what happened. She popped her shoulder back into socket while maintaining distance, and the arena went silent because that was not normal, that was not something people just did. Except humans did it regularly. Humans had hypermobile joints and pain tolerance that other species found disturbing. The match continued for another 19 minutes. Vorth was slower now, favoring his damaged knee, frustrated and angry, and losing the tactical clarity that kept fighters alive. Jax kept circling, kept striking, kept bleeding him down through 1,000 small cuts that added up to structural collapse. At 36 minutes total, Vorth's knee gave out completely. He fell, tried to rise, fell again. The medical team called it match over. The warrior caste sections were silent. The human section was screaming. Jax stood in the arena center, breathing hard, bleeding from cuts on her face and arms, and looked up at the command box. She raised one hand and pointed at the challenger gate. Next, the Institute officials tried to invoke mandatory recovery time. Regulation stated challengers could take up to 2 hours between matches for medical treatment. Jax cited the exact same regulation back at them. Recovery time could be waived by the champion. She waived it. Krell entered the arena. Kythe were different from Drakenor. Faster, more agile, with exoskeletons that provided natural armor and mandibles that could shear through metal. They were also cold-blooded, which meant their performance was temperature-dependent. The match lasted 23 minutes. Jax spent the entire time making Krell work, making him move, making him expend energy while she conserved hers. Humans could regulate temperature through sweating. Kythe could not. As Krell's body temperature rose from exertion, his reaction time slowed. When he finally slowed enough, Jax went for the joints where his exoskeleton segments connected, not trying to pierce the armor, targeting the soft tissue underneath. Krell submitted when his left leg joints gave out, and he could not stand. Jax was limping heavily now. Her shoulder was swelling. The cuts on her arms were bleeding freely. Medical team tried to approach. She waved them off. Third match. Shanrex, the Valorian. Valorian were crystalline, beautiful, and deadly. They could manipulate localized gravity fields, making themselves heavier to hit harder or lighter to move faster. They were also rigid in ways that flesh was not. Jax spent 29 minutes finding the resonance frequency. It was a physics trick, the kind humans loved. Everything had a resonance frequency. Hit it with the right rhythm at the right intensity, and you could shatter it. She used the arena floor, stomping in calculated patterns, forcing Shanrex to move in specific ways that created accumulating vibrations in her crystalline structure. When Shanrex cracked, the sound echoed through the entire arena like breaking glass. She submitted before the fracture could propagate to critical systems. Jax was barely standing. 3 fights with only sensor scans between them. She had burns from Shanrex's gravity manipulation. Her ankle was fractured. She had lost enough blood that the medical sensors were screaming warnings. The human section was beyond screaming now. They were on their feet, chanting something in a human language that did not translate but somehow meant everything. Every other section was dead silent. 4th match. A Drakenor named Kresh, one of Vorzak's followers. Kresh had watched 3 warriors fall. He was terrified now, and terrified fighters made predictable mistakes. Jax used that. She fought aggressively, taking risks, because Kresh was overcompensating. He was defending too much, second-guessing, seeing threats that were not there. Humans were psychological warfare specialists, wrapped in unremarkable packaging. The match ended in 14 minutes when Jax got inside Kresh's guard and struck his throat hard enough to trigger the referee's medical override. 1 left. The final Drakenor, Vextar, stood at the challenger gate. He looked at Jax, swaying in the arena center, bleeding from a dozen wounds, barely able to stand. He looked at the medical teams waiting with stretchers. He looked at his companions being carried away. He forfeited. Just turned and walked out of the arena while 15,000 beings sat in stunned silence. The Institute officials were paralyzed. This had never happened. Not in 3,000 cycles of tradition. A human had invoked ancient law and systematically defeated 4 warrior caste cadets in consecutive matches, and the 5th had refused to fight her. Jax took 1 step toward the exit gate and her legs gave out. The human cadets vaulted the barrier before security could react. 22 humans surrounded their fallen pack member, and there was something in their formation, something primal and fierce, that made even warrior caste species hesitate. The medical team worked on Jax for 3 hours. Fractured ankle, dislocated shoulder, cracked ribs, severe lacerations, borderline hypovolemic shock from blood loss. Also dehydration, muscle trauma, and what the human medic described as running on spite and neurochemicals instead of actual physical resources. She would recover. Humans were excellent at recovery. She woke up 18 hours later in medical, in the bed next to Tix. The Quillen was awake, fur cycling through colors that meant relief and gratitude, and something that did not translate but meant everything anyway. The Institute was in chaos. Trial by combat had never ended like this. The hierarchy was not supposed to be challenged like this. Humans were supposed to be average. But the footage was everywhere. Every cadet had watched. Every species had seen. Humans were not stronger, not faster, not more advanced. But they were terrifying in ways that warrior caste species were not equipped to understand or counter. Over the following weeks, trial by combat challenges dropped by 83%. Warrior caste cadets were suddenly remarkably polite to support caste species. The sight of a human in the corridors made cadets who had previously swaggered everywhere suddenly very interested in being elsewhere. Vorzak was medically discharged due to permanent joint damage. Krell withdrew from the Institute entirely. Shanrex was sent home to her family in disgrace. Kresh barely graduated and received no command recommendations. Jax recovered and returned to training like nothing had happened. The human cadet population tripled the next enrollment cycle. Apparently word had spread to Earth. Instructors adjusted their teaching approaches, not officially, not in ways they would admit, but human tactical assessments were weighted differently in planning exercises. Human opinions were solicited more frequently. Human cadets were integrated into leadership positions that had previously gone exclusively to warrior caste species. The galaxy was still full of warrior species, of apex predators who had conquered their worlds through strength and violence and natural advantages. But now they knew something new. Humans were pack animals, and the thing about pack animals was elegantly simple. You could hurt one, but then you had to deal with all of them. And humans, it turned out, were spectacularly good at holding grudges and even better at making those grudges everyone's problem. 4 cycles later, When the Institute updated its regulations, there was a new section in the trial by combat protocols. It was written in careful legal language, but it essentially stated, engaging in combat challenges against cadets with human pack bonds is strongly discouraged and may result in career-limiting outcomes. The section was never officially explained. Everyone who had been in Arena 1 that day understood perfectly. Tick made full recovery and graduated first in their class in strategic logistics. Jax graduated with honors in tactical command. They both received offers from 6 different fleet commands. They accepted positions on the same ship because that was how pack animals operated. And somewhere in the Institute's archives, in the files that documented every significant event in 3,000 cycles of operation, there was a new entry. It was filed under Humans. Assessment update. Do not engage without careful consideration. The galaxy was vast and full of species that had evolved to be faster, stronger, more specialized. Species that could survive in hard vacuum or breathe methane, or manipulate gravity with their minds. But humans had evolved to be enduring, to be adaptable, to be the kind of species that would follow prey across entire continents just to prove they could. They were not the apex predators. They were something far more concerning. They were the species that apex predators learned to avoid. And in the grand hierarchy of civilized space, that turned out to be the most important distinction of all.